and welcome to Tech Tips with Solo Media. I'm Amanda, and I actually have the Sony A7 IV here. I waited for this camera for months. I think I ordered it back in the early spring of last year. Got it somewheres around late May, June, but we had a couple of things going on. We were really busy building a TV bus and all kinds of fun stuff like that. So then over the summer, I used it the whole summer. By the way, this is my 6-month or so review. Used it the whole summer and took tons of photos, did tons of beautiful videos with it and everything. You can see some of those here. And I got all my thoughts together and I had all my complaints together. And then they launched an update in September that nullified all of my complaints for this camera. So I had to re-review it, and now finally getting around to telling you what I think about this camera. Now, I'm a Canon user. I've been a Canon user for a long time. I think the first Canon I bought was the it was the Rebel T2i, I think way back in 2007-ish or 6-ish, and I fell in love with Canon. I've always been a Sony broadcast person. I love Sony broadcast cameras, but as far as the photography or the mirrorless or the hybrid shooter cameras, I've always been a Canon person. So it took me a long time to try to figure out Sony's menu system, and they've done a lot better. We tested the little, now I'm not gonna get it right, I think the E10 back last year, and that was the first Sony menu system I was in for these kind of cameras, and it was insane. They've done a lot better with this guy, but it's still, for me, as someone who's used Canon for almost 20 years, a big difference. It takes me forever to find where to format the card in it, and so I say all that to say this. For those of you who are hardcore Sony users, please be kind. This is an honest Canon user's review of this Sony camera. And for me, I thought maybe the most relevant thing now after 6 months is to just show you some of the tests that we have done with this camera up against some of the other cameras. First thing I wanted to show you was this camera's macro kind of shots. I actually was just out one day with this, and I had my regular Canon EOS R with me, and we just handheld a couple of photos of these beautiful water droplets. All handheld, no stabilization except for what's actually in the camera, no tripod or nothing. And look at how beautiful and crisp these water droplets look. Like, this is quality out of this camera. But then the very standard Canon EOS R I found was even sharper. And that could just be the glass. Like, the Canon glass is so phenomenal, but they're still pretty close. I mean, you're looking at apples and other kinds of apples here. Very beautiful, both pictures. So again, that was the Canon EOS R, not the R5 or anything. So now, recently, I went out to try to get ducks to try to do the animal eye tracking. I went out on 2 separate occasions to try to test the animal eye tracking in the R7 and the R5. And I didn't feel like any of these cameras were really 100% nailing the ducks. They look pretty in focus in one way, but when you do the pixel peeping, you can sort of see that their eyes aren't as sharp as they could be. Certainly not to the caliber that it would be if I was doing human portraits. So again, you can see here, just wonderful, wonderful shots of all of these ducks, but none of them were 100% sharp on the eye. I found oftentimes they were really sharp on the necks. All right, so again, just before we leave the ducks and the photos, all of these photos that I looked at so far, like, the colors are so crisp and so sharp. I mean, can colors be crispy? I really actually enjoyed the color out of this. One of my major complaints with Sony before was that the color science wasn't as great, especially being a Sony broadcast camera user, like a big production truck. I've loved the Sony colors in production, but again, prosumer prosumer level cameras were very not the same as far as the video color. But I'm really loving the color coming out of this guy. The next thing that I did is I really tried to get highlight recovery and shadow recovery out of this camera. I tested it again against the R5 and the R7. I went out and I shot early in the morning with some bright sun in behind and really got the shadow on this pine cone. And you can really see that the shadow recovery in all three cameras is incredible, and the highlight recovery in all three cameras looks really good too. This is just a quick example, and of course, Luminar makes it so easy at times. Luminar doesn't sponsor me, although they should. They should sponsor me because I use them a lot. But Luminar makes it look so easy actually when you're doing these highlight recoveries. Maybe it's not a true test. Maybe you'd rather I do this in Lightroom, but I honestly think I could get the same results in Lightroom, maybe with a little bit more time on my hands. But you look here, all three cameras performed, I think, equally well in shadow recovery and highlight recovery in this task. So next up, for a full rounded test, I had Jake again take the R7, the R5, and the Sony out and vlog with them simultaneously. I really, really wish that I had put an action camera on him because I wish you guys should have seen it. He took a Vanguard VO travel tripod and had all three cameras on the tripod itself, like a giant, massive selfie stick. These are not light cameras, all with like nice big Canon and Sony glass on them. So yeah, he did a great job. But look, you can see him walking here. Well, actually, let's just play the clip real quick.
This is a wobble test on the R7, the R5, and the A7 IV on Sony. And we're just checking to see if it isn't wobbled in the background. It's a little bit hard to set three cameras on a stick, so sorry if they're not perfectly straight. But check it in the background, see if there's any discrepancies or weirdness in the background. Alright, awesome, thanks.
So you can see while he's walking, all the cameras perform fairly well. I really do think that the R5 has an edge on both the other cameras in terms of stability, but you're honestly not going to notice that much. The R7 and the A7 IV do an awesome job in terms of, I'm so sorry, the Alpha 7 IV do an awesome job at being stable and working as a vlogging camera, keeping him in focus at this range. Let's take one more quick listen and just to listen to the audio on camera, and you can just compare it real quick to the other two cameras.
This is a wobble test on the R7, the R5, and the A7 IV on Sony. And we're just checking to see if it isn't wobbled in the background. It's a little bit hard to set three cameras on a stick, so sorry if they're not perfectly straight. Get in the background, see if there's any discrepancies or weirdness in the background. Alright, awesome, thanks.
So again, I'll say this. The audio is survivable, but if you're going to do anything professional, make sure you pick up a Zoom F2 or something like the DJI mics to have with you. They're easy to carry, and these mics are getting smaller and smaller. So if you want to up your game, definitely pick up a microphone. But there, you can hear what the audio sounds like. Next thing we're going to look at is we actually chased my son through the forest with the three cameras. Let's take a look. Between the R7 by Canon and the Sony Alpha 7 IV, I feel like the Sony has an edge, but when you throw the R5 in there, it blows the others out of the water. Of course, it has a huge price difference in it, but yeah, overall, I think that you really could salvage the footage from the Sony. Now, to be fair, I looked at this test and I thought, Jake, you actually had a different kind of shot with the R5 than you did with the other ones. So I sent him out to shoot a second time. So he chased my kid again, our kid, through the forest. And once again, like hands down, the R5 stability blows the other cameras out of the water. But looking at it, you could stabilize easily in post-production the Sony footage as well. I'm not going to say the same about the R7. I didn't feel the R7 performed half as good, the Canon R7 compared to the A7 IV. The A7 IV definitely could be salvaged in post, but straight out of camera, the R5 was incredibly good. So, all right, thank you to my son for being a test subject. All right, next up, everybody's favorite, or at least my favorite, Jake dodging behind trees and trying to outsmart the eye tracking on these cameras. So let's roll that. Okay, so I could say all three of the cameras held on to Jake super well. You're not going to be sad with the eye tracking in this camera. As far as humans are concerned, this thing does a great job. Didn't lose him at all. Now, I shot in the highest 4K that all these cameras could do, and one thing I have to say is if we just stop for a second and take a frame from the R5 and a frame from the A7 IV, I felt that the A7 IV actually had a sharper image than the Canon did in the 4K. So just something to think about. Really great quality in these cameras. Finally, we shot some S-Cinetone versus C-Log. I did on a sunny day, and then on a not so sunny day, we shot Linus with S-Log versus C-Log. And if we look at some of the shadow recovery and some of the color grading here for a second, I can honestly say I really do like the S-Cinetone picture, and I can see why so many people love that as an option in camera. When I look at the S-Log versus the C-Log, S-Log 3 versus C-Log 3, our good buddy Marcus actually graded this for me and put a lot of work into it. He says that he felt that the recovery overall in or not the recovery, but the gradability, I guess, the coloring from the Sony outperformed the Canon, even the R5 in this case, much more color. I think it's 10-bit color in this. To me, I feel like they both were pretty equal. You know, somebody who, I'm not grading or editing as often, I'm more the person who's looking through the final edit, producing the programs from more of a producer standpoint than an editing standpoint. So if he handed me either of the footage, I probably would be fairly okay with it. But I'll take his word for it that the Sony outperforms the Canon in this field. The next test we did was actually low light recovery, and all the Sony users will be quite happy and impressed to say that my findings at all of these different ISOs were that the Sony does extremely well in low light, so much better than the Canons. The Canon's definitely usable. Again, you can see I got the R7, the R5, and the A7 IV here. We did it at 3200, 6400, and then 12,800 ISO in a room with almost no light in it. And the Sony, even without being having the exposure raised to a normal level in post-production, still looked usable. And then when you add the noise reduction to it, incredible. Like, definitely usable footage. Sony is famous for having great low light, and I can absolutely attest to that here. Next up, we did some slow-mo, and you know, let's just look at this. It's beautiful. Jake throwing leaves up in the air, loving life. Yeah, to be honest, these cameras are so equal. You see the R7 lost focus there a little bit though. The Canon R7. R5 holds the focus like a champ. So does the A7 IV. But yeah, these cameras are so wonderful. Even the colors, like between the Sony and the R5, they are a little different, but you know, they're getting closer and closer to not having such different profiles that you can't use them together in one way. Love the slow-mo. I can say that the R5 had a higher, what do you call it? A higher resolution. You could go higher. You could go 4K 100, whereas I think that this guy only does 1080 in slow-mo, and I think that the R7 only does 1080 in slow-mo up to 100. So something to look at and consider when you guys are looking for slow-mo cameras. Personally, I wouldn't use any of these guys really as my regular slow-mo camera. Whenever I want to do slow-mo, I grab my C70 because that thing can do 4K 120, no problem. Love that camera. All right, now, final thoughts and things that I really liked about this camera. Love the handling of this guy. I felt that like everything is exactly where I want it to be. It feels nice. It feels relatively balanced. Again, compared to Sony's I've tried in the past, a lot of Sony's I felt like it just pulls your wrist because of the heavy glass. I feel like the Canons have always been a little bit more balanced. Like I often walk through the forest with my R5 like this and a big old 70 to 200 mil in. But yeah, this feels really good. Great grip. I actually really love all the quick features, the assignability of all the buttons. One of my favorite things about this camera that is new to this Sony lineup is actually the focus mapping. Check this out. If you guys haven't seen this before, you put the focus mapping on in the menu here, and honestly, when you're trying to follow somebody in video and walking back and forth, this is so extremely helpful. And the other case in which this could be really helpful is if you wanted to get more things in focus in a shot like this, you could use this focus mapping to decide how much your f-stop should be to adjust the depth of field accordingly for your shot. So I love this. One of the reasons why I love this the most too is I have a lot of camera guys who work with me on weddings or whatever and come in as my assistant, and they always forget which way to go when they're trying to track the bride coming up and down the aisle. This definitely fixes that. So awesome feature. What else can I say about this camera? I did find that it overheated. In the summertime, we used it quite a bit, and it kept on overheating even more than the R5 did. So maybe I need to do a little bit more testing or see if this is unique to this particular camera that we have, but it's not immune to it, that's for sure. Overall, I definitely could recommend it. I overall could recommend this camera to you guys. I think that it's an excellent little hybrid camera. It's great video out of it. It's great for photography. In fact, I'm super impressed with this as a photography camera. And Sony's getting better and better. I'm not going to go into all of the details with you guys because there's other people out there who can do better reviews on it and tell you all about the different memory card options and things. That's not what this video is. It's just my feelings about using it after 6 months. I actually really liked it. I wasn't 100% sure I would love the Sonys because I've tried several Sonys over the years and keep coming back to Canon, and I don't know that I'm ready to leave Canon either. But definitely the Sonys are getting better and better and better in terms of color and in terms of some of the other features. They also added touch shutter on the camera, which is something that I like. I know there's a lot of people that are out there, you have to use the EVF for all of your shots. Well, I'm often out shooting, you know, professional stuff, and you know, you could be shooting a bride or something in a wedding, and it could be muddy outside, and honestly you don't want to have muddy knees the whole time that you're going for the rest of the day. So I love, if I have a low to the ground shot, I don't necessarily have to also get on my knees. I can just touch it. That's when I use it. I of course don't use it when I'm shooting, you know, regular standing up. But when you have to get into places where you don't want to be muddy, that's an awesome feature to have. And Canon has had it for a long time. Now, final thing, I liked it so much, I picked up this one. This is the Sony A7 R5. So we'll be testing this really soon. So leave us any comments in the description, things you might want to know about this, or you might be interested to see what our thoughts about it were, side by side, these two cameras, or against the R5. Let us know, and I really hope that this was helpful to you. Again, I'm not a Sony expert, but this was my experience with this camera. Really do like it. We'll see you in the next one, and yeah, thanks.